Welcome everybody to our City Council special meeting, August 10th. The time is 5:35 p.m. Tonight we have our budget workshop. Could we get roll call, please?
Roll call. Councilmember Soto?
Present.
Councilmember Moran?
Present.
Councilmember King? Mayor Pro Tem Garcia?
Present.
Mayor Aguilar?
Present.
For the record, Councilmember King is not in attendance, but his absence is excused.
Could we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Could we please remain standing for a moment of silence for our first responders and military members? Thank you. Council, any changes to the agenda? Okay, I don't see any, so we're going to go ahead and go to our citizen comments. At a special meeting, members of the public wishing to address the council for any matter on the agenda may do so at this time. Not under the provisions of California Government Code, City Council is prohibited from discussing or taking action on any item not on the agenda. Comments are normally limited to 3 minutes. Do we have any citizen comments at this time? Anybody on the phone or any emails? No? Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our budget workshop. Item is the proposed budget fiscal year 2022-23 workshop.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, council members, city staff, members of the public. Today, we bring you the first of our budget workshops for the fiscal year 22-23. This is the city manager's proposed budget. We have put together a budget plan that we feel addresses city projects, city needs, and it is a budget that it's balanced at the moment. So we will have our finance director, Jennifer Reedman, go over a presentation of the current status of the general fund and the major programs within the city's budget. And we have city staff here present if there is any questions from the council in regards to program-specific items that we have included in this budget, and if there are any requests, we will have a tally of those requests, which city staff, our finance team, will bring back at a later by tomorrow in our second workshop, so we can present any ups or downs or any incorporations of this request to our city budget. So with that, I will let Jennifer take us through the budget presentation.
Thank you, Vanessa. So I'm Jennifer Reedman, Finance Director, and I have with me Happy Baines, who is here in support of pulling any additional information as needed. Again, thank you to the finance directors and officers for attendance today in preparation of providing council and the public information on our proposed budget. As an overview, what we have previously provided, and a copy is on the back desk and it's on our website as well, is the budget book as it's referred to. And in this presentation, we will be going over the budget book contents. We'll talk about budget terminology, the budget process. We'll hit on a couple of highlights for the budget and talk about next steps. As was mentioned, we have a balanced budget that is proposed that supports the services for the community of the city of Livingston. The budget book itself, as mentioned, is available online on our website. It includes 6 separate sections that are the introduction section, the fund descriptions, budget summaries. We go over operations in the budget book, and also toward the end of the budget book is the list of projects, equipment, and improvements slated for the fiscal year, as well as miscellaneous statistics for the city. The presentation itself will include a high-level overview of the budget information, and we'll go over initially the budget terminology. When we talk about the city of Livingston, we refer to it as a full-service city, And really what that entails is that we have included in our city services the elected officials, administration, public safety, community development, recreation, as well as public works. Some additional budget terminology to consider. As we talk about revenue and revenue types, there are two distinctions to be made. There is discretionary revenue, such as sales tax, property tax, franchise fees, and business license fees that are available for the use at the discretion of City Council to meet its objectives. We also have another revenue type, which is the non-discretionary revenue, and that revenue is not at the discretion of the City Council. It is slated specifically for its intended use. For example, grant funds, any assessments for the landscape maintenance districts, or any utility revenue that is slated specifically for that purpose. Again, that's referred to as non-discretionary. On the expenditure side, we have expenditure types as well, and to define those at a high level, we have personnel, maintenance and operations, such as utilities, postage, telephones, regular just operations of the departments themselves. As well, we have an expenditure type that's referred to as vehicle, equipment, and improvements, and those are actually costs related to special items or projects, any major purchase or other improvements that are included in the budget. The last thing for budget terminology that we'll cover is the fund balance. So the fund balance consists of the carryover balance from the prior year. Added to that is any current year budgeted revenues, reducing that with any current year budgeted expenses, and we end up with what is referred to as the ending fund balance. And that will continue to have that cycle year over year. So one of the things we wanted to cover was just the overall budget process. We generally start with what our revenue projections are, and those can come from a variety of places. So for example, we have a rate study for our water, wastewater, and sanitation services. We also have projections that we receive, for example, from the League of California Cities for gas tax. As well, we have a provider of our revenue projections for property tax. So when we start out the budget process, we're looking for what those revenue projections are. And then the second step, once we have a firm understanding of our expected revenues, we then put the expenditure projections against those revenues. The intention all along this process is to maintain a balanced budget. Then what we did in the process is we met with the department heads and we went through the budget draft review. And that gave them an opportunity to see what their ultimate budgets ended up looking like and allowed us to have conversation about information included in those budgets and any questions that we might have had in that process. Right now, we're at the phase of the budget workshops where we provide a high-level overview. We've provided the budget document, the budget book, and we'll go through the process that ultimately will end up with budget adoption. And then that becomes the foundation for our financial system and our ongoing operations for the fiscal year. This is a complete list of all of the city's funds. And included in it are, of course, the general fund. We have all of our special revenue funds, debt service funds, capital projects funds, as well as our enterprise funds. And you can see on this slide, we have primarily blue, and those are funds that are mostly non-discretionary, meaning they don't have an option for council's discretion for spend. However, what we've highlighted in green and what we're going to cover in this presentation are mostly items that have some discretion with regard to their spend. Primarily what we're going to cover is the general fund, our community development, which includes planning, engineering, and building, and recreation. We'll cover gas tax. Those three funds have a general fund support component in them, and so we thought it would be important to bring that information to you so you understand the impact of the general fund for those funds. And lastly, we're going to cover the enterprise funds, and again, those are funded by the rate studies that were recently adopted and implemented, and we'll go through that in more detail as we get through those slides. Some highlights for this year's budget. We have our major projects listed here. Towards the end of the budget book, there is a comprehensive list of all of the major projects, equipment, and vehicle purchases slated for this fiscal year. But what we wanted to touch on here were some of the major projects on that list. The first two are actually funded by what is referenced here as ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan Act. And that was important funding for many communities in order to support this type of work. And you can see that we also have some other non-ARPA funded projects, such as well repairs. We also are very well aware and excited for the Prop 68 grant, which is the Livingston Recplex that provided us $7.4 million in grant funding for that project. We also have highlighted a couple of the projects that are well expansion or upgrades or updates that are funded by the TCP settlement that was previously received and is slated for these major projects. And something to note, these projects, although initiated in this fiscal year and budgeted for in this fiscal year, they are inclusive of fund balances that have rolled forward. As well, these projects may carry on for multiple years because it's unlikely that some of these major projects would be completed in a single fiscal year. Just to note that. So I mentioned previously the ARPA, or American Rescue Plan Act funds. The City of Livingston's allocation was $3.56 million in total. Of that amount, we have already completed employee stipends to the City of Livingston essential workers. We've already completed the purchase of a ripper tractor for the sewer department. As well, we have some items that are budgeted for this coming year for wastewater improvements and a water well site. There is a remaining balance, and this is something that at this time it's recommended that it be used for broadband project for the council chambers to eliminate future interruptions of service for the receivers of the live streaming. This chart demonstrates the revenues that are budgeted for fiscal year 22-23 for all funds. The total is $63.8 million, and you can see that we have a variety of categories for those revenues: charges for services, for example, of course, taxes, and intergovernmental revenues that would be coming into the city based on those projections that I mentioned that happened early in the budget process. And following the revenues would then be the expenditures for all funds, and the total of which is $81.6 million. Reminding ourselves that the variance between the two is primarily made up of those fund balances that have carried forward from prior years. We do budget them in total, mostly for all funds, and primarily they are project related, as you can see from the chart. We do have some maintenance and operations and other costs identified as well. So now we're going to get into a little more detail on the general fund proposed budget. The general fund revenues are projected to be $7.5 million, the majority of which are coming from taxes. And those taxes consist of property tax, sales tax, transient occupancy tax, franchise fees, and other items that are categorized as taxes. We do also have, as you can see, other revenues, licenses and permits, charges for services, as well as the intergovernmental. And as a reminder, the general fund is used to account for most tax-supported activities, such as the elected officials, administration, police, fire, parks maintenance, and public works administration. Looking at the revenue trends for the general fund, we can see that year over year, there hasn't been a significant change overall in the distribution of the revenues received. Primary receipt of funds comes from the taxes that I mentioned. The green stripe that you see in each of those previous years is the intergovernmental revenues. And it's primarily made up of property tax that is received in lieu of vehicle license fees. Back in 2004, there was a swap made for property tax when they eliminated the vehicle license fees that would come to us. So that's what that represents, is those funds from the county for that intergovernmental revenue. Another way to look at the general fund expenditures is by category. And so this slide demonstrates by category the activity in the general fund that has been budgeted, totaling $7.5 million. Again, we are a service-based organization, and like many cities, most cities, our personnel costs generally are the higher of our cost, again, to provide that service to the community at the level that is expected. And this view is looking at the general fund expenditures by department. Again, still the $7.5 million that is budgeted. And typical of full-service cities, public safety expenditures are generally the largest portion of the general fund budget. In addition, we have our administrative services, public works administration, the parks maintenance, as well as fire and elected officials. If we look at the general fund revenue versus expense and its related fund balance year over year historically, we can see that there's a slight increase in the fund balance year over year. And that is, again, made up of the beginning fund balance plus revenues minus expenses, coming up with an ending fund balance. This slide takes from that previous slide and provides a projection going forward for the next 5 years. And we can see that year over year, that trend is expected to continue, whereby we would have incremental increases in the fund balance in the general fund. And now we're going to switch from, yes?
I'm just wondering, would you rather have questions at the end or questions in between or as they come up, or how do you feel? What do you think is best?
If whatever pleases the council, but if it makes sense to ask questions about the general fund while we're on the general fund, we're open to it, definitely. But I look to you to help drive this presentation however you prefer to have it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll transition now to the community development proposed budget for 22-23. And again, as a reminder, community development really refers to planning, building, and engineering. This is a historical view year over year and also the current year expected or proposed budget for fiscal year 22-23. When we look at the trend historically, we can see that the reserves that were had in fiscal year 19-20 were depleted in fiscal year 2021. Conversely, we can see that the general fund support in 19-20 was less than and continued to grow throughout those remaining years. And that is actually very typical. Cities often supplement their planning cost with general fund support when those reserves are depleted. Moving on to recreation. And again, what we've decided to present was those funds that have general fund support to demonstrate the year-over-year activity for the knowledge of those who are looking at this information. So the recreation fund, typically we would see that there would be a 40-60 split, 40% coming from user fees, those people who are paying for events and activities in the community, and 60% would be coming from general fund support. So this is not abnormal, but we can see that year over year, the revenues have fluctuated as a result of likely the pandemic and the activities that were able to be funded from user fees. But now we see in fiscal year 22-23, it's almost an exact 40-60 split between fees and general fund support, which is very typical. And the last fund we'll cover in these governmental funds is the gas tax fund. This fund, year over year, has also had a mix of either the use of reserves and/or general fund support in order to fund the expenses in the gas tax fund. When we look at the proposed budget for fiscal year 22-23, we see that the general fund support is no longer required, and it actually is going to use some reserves that have built up. As we're all aware, there is a lot of activity in the electric vehicle space as well. There is a proposal from California that by 2030, we will eliminate the sale of gas-powered vehicles. It's a proposal. We're not factoring that in here. And in fact, this year, the 1 millionth electric vehicle was sold out of Stockton. So it was a bit of a mark in time. But as that increase in electric and hybrid vehicles continues on an upward trend, we will see that the future impacts of this and we'll then understand how conversely, for example, one of the taxes or fees that we receive in the general fund is a franchise fee. As more people are getting electric or hybrid plug-in vehicles, electricity will likely increase, and then therefore those franchise fees related to that activity will increase. So we may find that the impact is not as great as one might think on the front end with the elimination of gas-powered vehicles. So are there any questions about those governmental funds that we've covered so far?
Yes, if you can go back to the last slide on the general fund. Okay, so kind of looking at the last projected 27-28, I noticed, and I'm sure there's a reason, but at the same time, this would help kind of forecast and what we do and what kind of decisions we make. So if you look at the green section, projected fund balance, it would be down to 3.7 below, kind of like compared to the previous 3 years. Is there a particular reason where that you could say, you know what, it's because of this, and that, without looking at like the fine details that residents might not have in front of them right now?
Understood. Yeah. So year over year, there is built into the projection certain increases. One-time funding goes away. Funding that has a limited term goes away, and that's all built into those projections. And so and without having the specific details, what we would glean from this is that something that was previously funded regularly either has ended or has reduced because of some other future projected change in that revenue, and/or the expenditures based on either MOUs or any other increasing expenses that a city would incur over time would cause us to use our reserves to backfill any shortfall in the revenues.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
Council, any other questions, comments at this time?
No? Thank you. Okay, I will move on now to the enterprise funds. So the enterprise funds consist of, as I mentioned earlier, the water, wastewater, and sanitation funds. And those are, again, funded by the recently implemented rate study. That rate study is in effect. It began in the fall of 21, and it's in effect until June of 25. Preceding the expiration of that rate study, by about 6 to 9 months, we'll need to conduct a new rate study to get us to the next period of years that the next rate study will cover. If we look at this slide, we can see that those operating expenses, minus any credits, any new projects, the ongoing debt service requirement for the water fund, and those rate revenues, we can see that the current fees are sufficient to cover those expected activities through that year in which these rates end, and then we'll reevaluate and again go out for a new study and determine if there is a rate change required or if we can maintain operations with the existing rates. The next slide, it highlights the water-specific projects. It includes mostly either the creation of a new well, the wellhead treatment of certain wells, as well as water line replacement. And we also have a Park Service water irrigation project that will be funded by a grant. And then moving away from water and into wastewater, again, these projections are based on the current rate study that's in effect, and we can see that the current rate studies are slated to cover the activities for wastewater, including projects that are budgeted in the wastewater funds as well. And then in those out years, we would be looking to do a new rate study and make an evaluation as to whether or not a change would be needed. And the last one that's covered by a rate study is the sanitation service. And so similar to the other two enterprise funds, we can see that the current fees are expected to be enough to cover the costs through the end of the rate study, including the existing contract for disposal services. And again, prior to the rate study ending, we'll do an evaluation. And that concludes the overview of the enterprise funds, which again are based on an existing rate study. But I'm happy to answer any questions or defer to the department head if there are any related to the enterprise funds, or at this point, anything in the presentation at all.
Council, any questions? All right, no questions.
Thank you. That concludes the presentation.
Okay.
But if there are any questions that you have come up with in reviewing the budget book, or if anyone has anything else to add or ask, we're here for that as well.
Thank you very much for the presentation, and obviously a lot of work has been done to get to this point. So we appreciate all the work from everybody, all the department heads, and Vanessa. Just a quick question. I know we went over, a summary and general terminology and all that good stuff. So I know of conversations having with Vanessa. I know we talked about having surplus and reserves, being, better than maybe past couple of years. Is that somewhere we could point to or see in the budget book just as a reference, or will that be something covered during tomorrow's budget, or? Because I know I've seen, I know yesterday, just to be transparent, yesterday I had a meeting with Vanessa, and I know I've seen some figures, and just want to make sure the council is aware and we are able to see and reference those numbers.
Yeah, I would definitely start by saying that on page 26 of the budget book, it is the budget summary, and you can see on the first line, it is the general fund, where it begins with the estimated balance, which would be that beginning fund balance. And then included in that is a projection of the revenues for the current fiscal year, as well as the expenses, and then ending with an estimated ending balance of just slightly higher than the estimated beginning balance. But I would defer to Vanessa if there's anything to add to that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, Council. So the purpose of the budget is to have a roadmap for our city staff to have an overview of what programs, what projects, what expenditures we are going to be working on for 1 year. So this is our framework for 22-23. We don't have. Within this book, we don't have something historical, but we could definitely put something historical for the council for tomorrow, so we can have that. We can see the path that our general fund reserves have taken from previous years. We'll look at 1920 till now.
Yes, please. I know that. I mean, it was to me, it was helpful just seeing kind of what we talked about yesterday with you, seeing that those numbers of, historically the past 3 years, how it looked and how it's going to be this year or what's projected to be this year. Another question real quick. I know I was just reviewing the book, and I know during the, where it says like revenue, all funds, expenditures, or revenues versus expenditures, I know there's like, so obviously it seems like there's more expenditures than revenues.
Yeah.
Is there a way you guys could like explain a little bit more about that? How, how there's a difference and some at first glance might seem like, oh shoot, we're wasting or we're spending more money than money that we're receiving, so.
Understood. Yeah, and that's a great question. In fact, on the slide that's up, which is page 26 that I referred to, on the beginning balance or estimated balance as of the beginning of the fiscal year, you can see that there was quite a large carryover. And so then the budget on the expense side, on the right side of the spreadsheet, is taking into account those beginning balances and is fully budgeting. Primarily, we'll see that in the capital projects column, those balances that have carried forward. And again, as I previously mentioned, those capital expenditures may not happen all in this fiscal year because projects often take a long time. And so we'll see those amounts continue to carry forward in future budgets where it's not using current revenue, it's using rather fund balance that has been accumulated over time.
So yeah, that's kind of what I was, the answer I was looking for. So it's the carryovers that make it seem like we're spending more money, but it's ongoing projects from previous budgets or years. So I appreciate you just clarifying that for the general public. For tomorrow, is each department going to kind of like say a little piece or talk about the department specifically? Or just going to do just a general overview tomorrow?
So the intention of tomorrow's meeting would be to bring back to council any requests that come out of today's meeting to demonstrate any fiscal impacts of those requests. But the overview itself was intended to encompass all of the activities at the department level, but at a high level. The book itself really has the details, but we're happy to answer and bring back any requests that you may have for additional information.
Council, do you guys have any specific questions to any department? Like, just in general, like for me, the question for just, I guess, the whole staff would be, do you guys feel like, are you guys able to, in regards to operations and staffing and projects and equipment, do you guys feel like you guys are in a good place in general, like fiscally? I mean, you guys maybe had some requests that aren't going to be able to be funded, or do you guys feel comfortable that we had an opportunity to help out each department? Like, what are the thoughts in general? Like, I just want to have a feel overall. Tony's volunteering.
Before moving on to the department, I mean, it is a city manager's recommended budget, but we do it together.
Yes.
So this is a budget that all of the department heads have provided their input, and they have come forward with their requests, their needs, their some of them their wants, and we have incorporated those items, those expenditures into this budget that we are proposing to, and the items that make sense for the city to continue to keep moving us forward, and continue to provide, make our processes more efficient, improve the quality of the services that we're providing. So all of that has been taken into consideration from our department managers, and they are a part of what this city manager's recommended budget is.
So in regards to the proposed idea about bringing in maybe a slide or I don't know, I'm assuming that's what it is. Tomorrow with the reserves for the last 2-3 years, is there a way to go back 5 or 6 years so we can kind of see the historical ups and downs or flats or whatever that might be? And because I think that when we're looking at historical, always 5 to 6 years is always best to forecast forward. If we see something that is not too flat, then we can figure out why, and then we can really have a better idea to forecast for the next 5 years instead of 2 or 3.
And I would definitely, I'm happy to provide that, absolutely, but I do want to caution, as we saw in that out year for the general fund projection, there will be fluctuations in revenues, for example, one-time revenues for a specific activity that may not have carried forward. So if there are large fluctuations, I'm happy to present the history, but we may need to take some time to dig into why there were variances in those years. But to start with, we can absolutely provide that information.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And then I think if they're not like super huge differences, it'll be, I think probably anyone within those departments will be able to kind of, oh, this is what it was, but unless it's like really something huge, then I guess you will let us know tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then, feel free to give me a call or text or, unless it's like really something, it's like, you know what, Mr. Moran, I need more time. So, unless it's really something drastic, but I don't foresee that, but just in case.
Sure, no, I appreciate that, but pulling the data for the last 5 years will be something we can do by tomorrow. Thank you.
I have a question for the police department. Are we still getting the MAPS grant? And yes, we are? Okay. And that's used at the middle school? Yeah. Okay. That's a good partnership with mental health. In regards to the CFDs, I know that's some specific to some of the landscaping and all that. How are we doing with those the CFDs?
Mayor, CFDs, they are intended to cover public safety services and park maintenance, park services, I'm sorry. So the landscape districts, or the landscape maintenance districts, those are the LMDs, and those are the funds that are designed to be to keep up with the maintenance of certain districts. And those were actually brought to council back in May for approval. So the revenues that you see there, those are already approved by council. It's part of our annual process to do the public hearing. So this is just, they're incorporated in the budget, but those were already items that were approved. I want to say mid-May, we brought this to, I'm sorry, I think it was June 7 when we did the public hearing, because those need to be incorporated in the tax roll, and we have a hard deadline for those LMDs, and those cover maintenance. And the maintenance was included when we brought the public hearing back in June.
Did we use the CFD for the playground? Or what funding do we use for the new playground at Lucero Park?
I would have to
Okay.
go back and look.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a new, so I see a new fire station capital fund. Is that a new funding source or funding account or whatever?
No, that's the same.
Still the same one?
It's
Okay.
for a new fire station.
Yeah.
It's not a new fund, it's for the new fire station.
Council, any other specific questions at this time? Or so the question was asked, any specific ask? In regards to that, obviously, as council members, I guess everybody has ideas and want to work on projects and make recommendations, but like overall, so having what amount are we talking about? Do we have a surplus to, recommend major projects or what's the, you know what I mean? What specifically could we recommend or whatever?
So at this time, based on the budget that's prepared in the preliminary budget, there's about 70,000 excess in the general fund. It's proposed. In addition, there was the 588,000 that was from the ARPA funds that is specifically only eligible to be used based on their guidelines. But that's something we can revisit tomorrow at the session to talk about what the use of those funds, what's allowed. And then when we demonstrate the proposed general fund balance, we can talk about any activities related to those dollars.
So thank you. You answered my question. So 70,000 from the general fund, and then the 500 and how much
588,000.
And yeah,
for
it'll be
repair.
helpful if we could get just kind of the guidelines of what could be used towards, maybe the, whatever the case may be. So if council has any ideas or recommendations, at least we know what the guidelines are and we could use them towards that. I know obviously it was, in general, we used it towards the employees and then some other capital projects, but, we'll see what, in regards to that, just the funding source, could we save it like for a long time, or it has to be used by a certain amount of, by next year, or what's the timeline for that?
It's time limited, so we have to allocate it and be spent by the end of 2024. I think our last reporting period, it's June 2025, and those funds that were allocated to cities need to be spent.
Okay, so we have a limit of time.
They're time limited, and one of the uses, permitted uses, it's for capital improvement, specifically for the water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. That's been one of the major components and major items that this ARPA funding has been very helpful for cities, and it is also the most, it is the easier to report, the easier to put in place, and the most beneficial to the cities, because this is fixing the infrastructure of today for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a lot of talks and a lot of, I guess, funding coming out of the state and federal in regards to broadband as well. So we should, really think about what we're going to do with this money and be wise and be responsible as well. But yeah, if we could get some kind of guidelines in regards to what could be used and come up with a good plan, especially if it's, it needs to be used by a certain amount of time. 2024 is that? And reporting, the last reporting period.
December
25?
2024 needs to be spent, but ideally, we want to be able to allocate the money, because if it's a project that it will take some time, we need to ensure that we have plenty of time in order for us to complete those projects and do the reporting. I know we touched on having a surplus in our general fund for about $70,000. In the event that council feels that we don't want to move forward with fully utilizing that surplus, you can always let it roll into our general fund reserves, which is what we are showing on page 26 of the budget, that absent using 100% of the revenues that we are expecting, those $70,000 will go into the bucket of our reserves. We will just continue to grow it for future.
And in fact, on that future projection, that is what's included, is that we would actually let that
Okay,
roll forward.
gotcha.
So it's growing from 3.4 to 3.5, for example.
Okay, that's the 70,000. Okay.
Correct.
So we have 3.5 reserve.
3.4, yeah,
Okay,
at the end.
that's good.
Yeah.
Good job, guys. Good job. Jackie or just Vanessa, for the centennial, you guys, in regards to that whole celebration and different events coming up, you guys feel comfortable with what's being budgeted for that? Oh, the microphone.
Yes, I feel like the amount is very generous, and we probably aren't going to spend all of it, and we're just moving right along. Thankfully, this year, anything that we didn't spend, they did roll it into last year, however the
Yeah, yeah.
fiscal works. We're doing good.
You're doing good? Tony, I'm gonna request in addition to Tony's budget, so you could get a new hat, a Giants hat, a Giants hat. I know, it's nice, it's okay. PD, you doing good? You guys good? Yeah. Engineering's office? A lot of projects. Yeah. All right. Council, any other questions, comments? Anybody? engineer department? You guys good?
Yes.
We're good. Yeah, we're just we're moving forward, pretty much following the schedules we had a couple of months ago when we did the presentation. So those, like Jennifer said, it takes a while to get those through.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, based on our workshop we had, I mean, there's a lot of
Right.
projects coming down,
Exactly.
a lot of work. But
And the rest of the, from city engineering side with reviews, and it just move forward as, there's some big projects like the Moon Glow and Arco, and they're moving forward.
sounds good.
So if I may, just real quick, so there's two amounts that you guys were talking about. Some of the ARPA funds, which have to be used by a certain date, and definitely, something to also consider is we have a lot of money forecast to be spent in water projects, wells and stuff like that, maybe that is also another option that we need to think about, and instead of just getting loans eventually later, maybe 170,000 can help a little bit. And then in regards to the other amount that roughly about $70,000 or so, in the real world, in the finance world, in the business world, Ms. Jennifer, what is ideally the percentage that any business or any city might want to have, or any entity might want to have in reserves in case for some rough times ahead?
That's a great question, and it is probably more likely industry-specific and city-specific, because each city is going to have its own requirements, and that is going to vary based on the services provided and the level of services provided. However, as you can see on page 26, we do also have the Revenue Stabilization Fund, and so annually, what the city has established is that 50% of that general fund reserve balance, that 70,000, 35,000 of it would be split between Fund 1110 and 1115. And both of those funds are the city's rainy day funds. So in the event of an economic catastrophe where we had to dip into those funds, the intention that has been set forth through previous council action is to set ourselves up for preventing our services from being impacted negatively from an economic downturn. So I can't say that there's a specific percentage, but best practice is exemplified here in what's already in place.
All
And
right.
year over year, if we can continue to build those reserves, we will only be able to support those services for a longer term in the event we needed to.
Yes, and definitely the way, well, I'm not an expert, but it looks like we're about to hit the wall pretty soon. So it'll be good to make sure that we have a few extra dollars available to make sure that we pay employees, that we have money to provide the services that we need. So $70,000 or $35,000 might not seem like a lot, but it will once it comes time to, that's somebody's half salary or so. Yeah. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
I think, comparing it to other years, I think the reserves are better than they were in other years. So I appreciate all the work that's been done, being fiscally responsible. So tomorrow we'll see some of the previous years compared to the current year. So I know there's been some progress made. So that's really good. So I appreciate that.
Could this be also because there's some positions throughout the city that were not filled within the last year or so, and so maybe there were some savings coming from those expenses not being incurred in salaries?
Some of the positions that have been vacant in the city, they have been vacant in the utility or the enterprise funds. So that's not the general fund. Yeah. So it's really, we are budgeting for personnel. We're budgeting for our maintenance operations that get paid out of the general fund. Yes, there is a piece of our public works administration time, but most of our water, wastewater, and the operators, they are all budgeted into the enterprise funds. So this outlook of a surplus is really all of our departments promoting and providing a lot of efficiencies in their operations. So I'm very thankful and very happy with it.
Good job, guys. A quick question. I know there's a playground at our Kelly Park, also with some damages. Are we expecting to use or budget for a new playground?
Yes, Public Works Superintendent Tony, he's made me aware of that playground equipment. We actually went out to see not just the equipment, it's antiquated, but also the restrooms facilities. They are in major repairs, and part of our plan is to have some of our municipal facility fees, which we already budget, the full amount to dedicate them to projects, to look into getting quotes and bringing that equipment to the council for approval in the future. We're looking at that. We're looking at the different areas in the city where our equipment needs replacement. It has reached its useful life. We are also looking internally at the city equipment, all of our computers. We have many of these computers that are running on like 3 versions of the software, and it's coming to a point where we are not going to be able to sustain, or we are being asked that we need to upgrade our software and our equipment as well. So this is a budget that incorporates many of those upgrades, and we're looking forward to putting those in place.
Perfect. I was actually going to ask that next, in regards to just equipment in general for different departments or even vehicles. I know PD's getting, is it 2 or 3 vehicles? 2? A limousine and a tank? Just kidding. So it's a SUV? Or?
Yes, please.
Yes, PD is getting a Chevy Tahoe and an Interceptor, just like the rest of the fleet.
Cool. Awesome. Is fire getting anything?
We have, well, that could be a request. I know that I have talked to Fire Chief Brian White, and he reviewed the budget that it's presented. I don't.
Is the $40,000 what type of equipment is that?
That I believe that is the $20,000 grant that we have been applying for in the previous years, where we have a 50% match for the fire equipment, the vest, and the
Gotcha, yeah.
fire extinguishers, I believe. So it's a $20,000
Perfect.
revenue and the $40,000 expense.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Council, any other questions at this time? Staff, anything else? We're good? We're good? We're good? Yeah?
Does the workshop allow questions from the public about this item? Does this go out to the public?
Yeah, it's a good opportunity if anybody has any questions. Or anybody on the phone. We didn't get any emails, huh, Monica? No, okay.
Catherine Shaw Rodriguez. I've got a couple of big questions that will impact future budgets, and then I have a couple of specific questions about a specific account. My first question is, when will we have actual numbers from the prior, from the prior fiscal year so that we can compare it to what the budget was for the prior fiscal year. And then the big elephant in the room is the tax sharing agreement with the county that was canceled in 2008, if I remember correctly. How are things going with getting that tax sharing agreement back? Because once upon a time, there used to be a 60-40 split of the property tax for fire services, where county would get the 60 and we would get the 40, and now they're getting it all. So there has been several $1 million over the past few years that have gone into the county's pockets that could have gone into Livingston's pockets for fire service, a future fire station that we've lost out on because we don't have a tax sharing agreement in place. So that's that one. And then my particular pet project, or pet fund, if you look at page 118 in your budget packet, that will be the TCP settlement fund. The first thing, my first question is when we get to, under the revenue, on intergovernmental, I see $17 million in intergovernmental. And my question about that particular number is that going to be grants or loans? Because anybody who's been following our TCP quality issues knows we are already past due in meeting the state guideline for getting the TCP 123 down to below the maximum contaminant level. And that work was originally planned to have been done already.
Thank
So-
you. Oh,
Go ahead.
so thank you for your questions. I'll take the first.
Yeah, I
question.
was going to say we'll tag
It
team.
will tag team, yes,
Yeah.
and bring in Tony as needed. So the first question was regarding the actuals for the prior fiscal year that ended June 30, 22. And we are in the process of working internally on our year-end activity that includes booking our payables, recording our receivables. And so once that activity is completed and we get the financial statement published, then we'll be able to bring budget to actual details forward. But it'll be only after that information is made available, after the work is complete to do that.
Okay.
And then I'll defer to the city manager to talk about the tax sharing agreement and perhaps Public Works for TC.
Thank you, Jennifer. Catherine, thank you for your questions on the tax sharing agreement. We have been holding meetings and conversations with the new with the new county executive officer. And at this moment, we are looking at setting up a task force, an ad hoc committee for us to open up the talks. We both, the CEO's office at the county and myself, we both recognized that the agreement that was talked about, and it came in draft to the city of Livingston, was something that happened before our time, before I was here, and before he was in the CEO's office. And potentially also the elected officials that participated in that draft agreement, they're completely new. So we have talked about approaching this is that we are going to start from square one and look at the items that have been talked before, because his history is very helpful, but at the same time, bring up the items that we city, feel that we're the big no, or the ones that we would like to improve as far as the agreement, and set up that task force to help us navigate and to help us bring something forward, again, between county and city. However, starting from square one, that means that it is going to take some time, because we need to get the buy-in from both agencies, from the city and the county. But we are, at the staff level, we are talking about revamp or like renewing these conversations, because not having an agreement, it won't be an option for us, city, in the short term, because we're coming into a full developed city, and if there are any hopes of the city growing, we're going to need to have this document in place. So we are having those conversations, and those items will be coming forward to the council and the Board of Supervisors in the near future. And
Okay.
yes.
The 17 million intergovernmental, because
Yeah.
I know we originally had a lot of revolving loans on the list, and I'd heard something about trying to apply for some more grants. So I'm just kind of wondering.
Yes, and Catherine, the $17 million, it's a transfer from the water fund into the TCP fund. So if you see that the 17 million, it's primarily covering the well 8, 9, 13, 17 and projects. That's the biggest chunk of monies that it's being allocated to that. It is part of the rate study, and if we put the rate study slide, you would be able to see that there is that. Let me see.
Yeah, because when I was looking on the page, well, I think it's 25 on the budget summary, I didn't see a $17 million transfer out. So is it a $17 million intergovernmental on the summary?
Yeah, so.
Coming from loans.
So
Go ahead.
that's coming in actually as a State
No,
Water
loans.
Resources Control Board grant.
The
And
enti-
so it's, go
And
ahead.
a 17, the whole 17 is going to be a grant?
So it's two separate.
Two separate
It's
grants?
TCP2 and TCP3.
Okay, so we're going to get $17 million in grants. Okay.
So the first one is 7.5 million, and the second is 9.5 million, but I definitely defer to Tony to speak to anything specific about it, or Mario to speak to anything specific about those dollars coming in.
Okay, and then the other line, the 5.6 million, which is shown as proceeds from debt, is that one a loan? On page 118.
Yeah, that's also referenced as TCP2 and TCP3.
Well, because I'm looking at, if I drop down where it says, 8, 9, 13, 17, project 2 and 3, and I slide my finger over, all the way over, there's a 0 in that line. But if I go up a bit to 2106, 3,700 proceeds from debt, and slide all the way to the right, I get that 5.6 million, which reminds me of the balance of the TCP fund, the balance of the settlement. So that's why I was curious whether that 5.6 million that's referenced as revenue is use of funds, use of the settlement that's left over from what we originally got in 2011, or if it is a loan, another loan from the state.
The way that it's referenced is that it's listed as also a grant, but we would definitely want to confirm.
Sorry, Jennifer,
Yeah,
I
no,
remember when
please.
we had our water project workshop, it is it's all coming from the water board, but now we are considered an underserved community, so now that $22.6 million, it was a loan before, all 22.6 million, but because we're now we are under that bracket, 75% is going to be grant money, and the other 25% it becomes a loan. So what you
Okay.
see here, the 17 million, it will be grant.
Grant, okay.
And the 5.6 is the loan that that the city will have to repay for the
Okay.
$22.6 million in monies. And then if you see to the revenue total, it's 22 million.
Right.
The expenses, it's 27 million. So it's implying that we will be fully utilizing the $5 million in the reserves that we have in the TCP.
Okay. So in addition to the grant portion and the loan portion, then we'll be using up the remainder of the TCP settlement money in order to get these projects done.
That's correct. And
That's correct.
Mario, please.
I'll chime in a little bit. On the reduction of the loans is due to the fact the city is disadvantaged. It became disadvantaged, so it qualifies for 75% grant and 25% low-interest loan. So that's how those grant amounts were able to go up, in addition with the cost escalations that everything's going up. So those were updated a couple of months ago, and things still keep going up. So we'll see where it settles. In terms of meeting TCP, the MCL, like you were referring, and all the state regulatory compliance type of thing, the city's actually doing well. As you know, well 8 has been on for
Yeah.
quite a while, and then wells 14 and 16 were completed recently, about a year ago or so. So some of the wells are already fully compliant. The system now is getting closer to meeting the state requirements.
Yeah, we just still have a couple of the big projects to do yet.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And
There will
any-
be 2 large centralized plants, which is the Arcalian,
Arcalian.
and then the expansion of the well 8 site. Those are the 2 larger ones. There will be one more with the wellhead treatment. It's called 19, and it's a replacement for 11.
Yeah, and that's the one at the well 8, that's the one we had to buy a little bit more land in order to.
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
That's correct.
So about how long is it going to take to get these projects done?
I don't have the schedule on me, so but it will go well into next year to get the approvals, and the funding agreements take a while. These are DWS, our Drinking Water State Revolving Fund. Grants that took about a year to get an agreement are taking 2 years just to get an agreement out of the state.
So would it be safe to say that what we'll be using, the settlement money that we still have, we'll kind of be using it to get stuff started until we get reimbursed by the state and keep rolling it until we get the projects completed?
You want to answer
Do you
that
know
one?
what, do you see what I'm, do you see what I'm saying?
I do, and I think that is a potential except for the fact that any costs that are incurred prior to the award of the grant would not be reimbursable. So we need to be mindful of those criteria before we engage in any work.
Actually, DWSRF has a date stipulated way prior to the funding agreement where funds are reimbursable. So there's a lot of, or most of that will be reimbursable.
Okay.
The thing with the TCP fund is the city has to pay ahead and then get reimbursed. So there's that period where the city has to float those costs.
Yeah, okay. That pretty much takes care of it.
Mario.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
We'll go ahead and adjourn our budget workshop at 6:44 PM. Thanks. See you guys tomorrow at 5:30.